So today is Daf Mem Vav, and we are around 8 lines down on Mem Vav Amud Aleph. We got up to the Tanur Avanan yesterday. We're going to finish this sugya today, though we're not quite there. It's going to take some time till we finish it. But recall that we read the psukim yesterday, which I think were really important. You know, this whole story of Motzi Shemra, which is framed as, you know, the man marries her, Ba'aleha, which is a word we're going to analyze extensively today. Literally, we think means he sleeps with her, and he hates her. Is what the pasuk does. V'yisna'eha, and then some la'alilat dvarim, right? He spreads these words about her. It's very unclear, and it still is going to remain a little bit unclear as to what exactly he does, right? So presumably, we think it means that he just goes the next day and says, "I married her, and she was not a virgin. She was not a betula." However, it's a lot more complicated because the question is, first of all, does he have proof of that? So if he slept with her and he found that she didn't have simanim of betula, that's one potential proof. But second of all, it's possible that he has witnesses, you know, that he goes the next day or something and he starts talking about it. And then witnesses come forward and say, oh, her, you know, we saw her 3 weeks ago hanging out with someone and we think they did something inappropriate. So the question really is, what's the level of proof as to what she did that would require him to be chayav for being motzi shem ra? Right? Is it just saying
only
it?
if she's in between 12 and 12 and a half, right?
But this is only if she's between 12 and 12 and a half. Correct?
Okay.
Let's say only between 12 and 12 and a half that he pays a fine. Above 12 and a half, we saw yesterday, and there was a machloket whether he gets makot or not for spreading lies about her.
Right.
Right? Presumably he does, but it was not so clear. So it says the Braita today, Tanur Abanan, it says in the pasuk that if he does this, anshu oto, they punish him. The pasuk actually continues, but by paying 100 kesef, and says the Braita zemamon. The punishment is that he pays this fine. But it said in the previous pasuk, v'yisru oto, that they also literally means punish him or they rebuke him. Zeh malkut. That means that they actually give him lashes, that they hit him. So says the Gemara, Bishlamav anshu zemamon. I understand that when it says they punish him, it means money, because if you read the pasuk, it says ichtiv anshu oto mea kesef. Right? They punish him with 100 kesef. V'natnu via na'ara. He gives it to the father of this woman. Ella, so that's obvious. Ella vayisru. It says in the first pasuk that they are yisru. They rebuke him. How do you know that means maybe they rebuke him by, I don't know, with words? Maybe they rebuke him by hanging him. I don't, you know, how do you know what it means? Zem makot minalan. Amar Rabbi Avo. Well, it's a liman. It's essentially a hekesh that you learn. Lamadnu yisru mi yisru. It says yisru here, and it says yisru by Ben Sorer or Morer, right? That we are yisru oto, that we rebuke him. And by Ben Sorer or Morer, it also is the word Ben. So the word yisru va yisru, and yisru mi Ben. And the word Ben is like a code word for makot. Because Ben mi Ben, because of course the source of makot is im haya im bin hakot harasha. That if he is a person who did this action that was wrong, then you give him makot. That's where we derive makot from. So that's the derivation. Ben mi ben. As it says, im hayim ben hakot rasha. So basically, it's the word yisru is not clearly defined, but elsewhere by Ben Sorer Morer we use yisru, we use the word ben. Elsewhere we use the word ben in the context of a punishment of makot. So that's how we know. Ask the Gemara today, as hara lemotzi shemra minalan. Where does the Torah tell you you're not allowed to do it? Right? Remember the principle we've had before, and we're going to have again in Sanhedrin, is that ein onshim elam kain masirin. You don't punish a person unless you warn them. Meaning, the Torah never gets up and says, "Don't do something." You know, if you do this thing, you're going to get punished, without first telling you, "Don't do the thing." Now, it's not always obvious, but it always tells you in some format, "Don't do the thing." So, where did the Torah say, "Don't do it"? Right. That, and the big example, of course, is the Arayot, where the pasuk in Achrimot says, "Don't sleep with this person. Don't sleep with that person." And the next parasha in Kedoshim, it says, and if you do it, you get killed. And if you do it, you get that. There's always an onish, and there's an azhara, and then an onish. Here the Torah is saying, this person told a lie about the daughter, about the woman. But how do you know that you're not, where did it say, don't do that? Right? So azhara, where am I? Azhara the motzi shemra minalan. Where's the azhara? But Lazar Omer, it's from the pasuk. It says totally elsewhere, nothing to do with this. Lo telech rachil ba'amecha. Don't be a liar. Don't spread false words. So you obviously are made up a story about this woman. That's essentially lashon hara. Rabbi Lazar says, Rabbi Natan Omer, it says, no, it's a different pasuk. The pasuk is of Nishmarta Mikol Davara. Protect yourself or watch out from any evil, literally means davar, a thing. We're reading it in dibur, any evil words, right? So if there's an azhara, don't spread bad words, lies. Now, asking what's the reason that each one disagrees with the other? Rabbi Elazar, my time Omer Mehai. Why didn't Rabbi Elazar say it from the pasuk of Nishmarta Mikol Davara? Because Ahumi Balek Pinchas ben Yair. That pasuk is actually used in a different brayta, in the famous brayta of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, where it says, now quote, "V'nishmarta mikol davara," you should protect yourself from any bad thing. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. That's referring to al yiharher adam biyom yavol lidei tuma balayla. It's referring to, you're not allowed to become tamei, to have sperm, to have shechvat zera. But Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair is extending that. Not only can't you do the act, but you can't even lead to the act. You can't be, start having thoughts during the day that would lead to that at night. So it's a separate level of Yisur. It's not just not doing the inappropriate thing, but it's not putting yourself into a position which is going to lead to that. So that's what you learn from Nishmar Tamikol Davarav. And not only can't you not do a bad thing, but you can't even do the prelude to a bad thing, right? So that's how we're to use that pasuk. Rabbi Natan, my time Omer Mehai. So why didn't Rabbi Natan use the pasuk of Lotelech Rachil to prove that you can't tell a lie? Ahu, that's a whole different, he uses it for something else. It says Lotelech Rachil, that is Azhara lebeidin shlehi rach lezeh v'kashel lezeh. Rachil does not mean they're a lie, it means rach. You shouldn't be soft, you shouldn't be easy to one and hard to the other. Beidin cannot treat people, get people in court. One's very wealthy and connected, and one is lower status. Beidin cannot say to one of them nicely, speak to them, with respect, and speak differently to the other Baldin. You have to treat everybody equally, which doesn't mean you have to be mean to everybody, but you have to be equally, relate to every person who comes to the court. Lo amar le'edim, you can't say to witnesses, bo v'hiduni, right? Sorry, it's a new thing. So lo yirach lezeh v'kashel lezeh, period. Now, that is, wow, I love that picture of Hanan. That is what he does with that puzzle. The next thing we're about to discuss is exactly the mechanisms of how this person, this husband, told this Motzi Shemra about the woman, meaning what exactly happened. So we're assuming that there are witnesses, right? And partly because we've always been talking about witnesses, but we're assuming there are witnesses. The question is, what is his relationship to the witnesses? So there's a couple ways to read this. One is that he comes to court the next day and he says, there's something suspicious going on here. I'm not confident that this woman I married has never slept with another man before, right? So he makes that announcement, basically. He says it over. And then witnesses come forward and say, oh, her, a month ago, we saw her at the fair with so-and-so, right? Or so whatever. They spread the word, right? Because obviously in these cultures, they were very, very, there wasn't a lot of publicity, I guess, right? So you start talking about it and people come forward. So let's say, says the Gemara now at the star, in the 8 lines up from the narrow lines, Lo amar le'edim vo v'idu. Let's say the husband does not go to witnesses and say, can you come and testify that my young bride is, cheated on me? But they come on their own. They just show up and they say, oh, her, we know the story about her. She's not a virgin. She's not a betula. She slept with someone else. And it turns out that they're lying, right? So the question then is, what is the responsibility of the husband? Says the Gemara, hu eino loka. He does not get makot because he didn't ask them to come. They came on their own. He doesn't have to pay the 100 because although he's the husband, he essentially benefited, or I don't know, benefit's the right word, but he, it involved him. The reality is that he didn't put them up to it. And so he doesn't have to pay. And says the bride continues, he v'zomimea, she and the witnesses who turn out to be false witnesses go and get skila. Makdimim lebeta skila. And of course we ask, as we always do, what do you mean, she and the witnesses? If the witnesses are telling the truth, she gets killed. The witnesses are lying, they get killed, and she doesn't. So he v'zomimea salkadaita, ela ohi ozomimea. You're right, that's what we mean. Either she, if they're telling the truth and they're tested and they seem to be verified, or them, if it turns out they're lying, are makdimim lebeit haskila. Okay, so now it implies that if the husband was not involved in the witnesses coming, they came on their own, then he's not guilty of motzi shema. Says the Gemara though, but what this Braita implies is taima de lo amra lahu ha. Sorry, the reason is because he didn't go to the witnesses and say, look, I married this woman. I really don't want to stay married to her. Can I pay you, can you do me a favor and tell any bad stories you know about her? But if he had said that to the witnesses, even if he didn't give them money, he didn't pay them $100 to lie about his.
I was just going to ask if they were being coerced, like by being actually paid to say something.
Right. So that's the thing. So we're saying now, it's implying here that if he had nothing to do with the witnesses, he's patur.
Yeah.
But if he had something to do with it, even if he didn't pay them, he just asked them to do it, right? Then he would be chayav. And that is the afuki mid Rabbi Yehuda. That in fact goes against Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, it's arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya on that first intermediate line, Rabbi Yehuda Omer inu chayav at sheyiskar eidim. Rabbi Yehuda says you're only chayav for being motzi shemra if you actually pay off witnesses. So not enough for you for the husband to show up the next morning and say, I didn't find Betuli. He has to show up and say, oh, and I found, and I was talking about it and I put up a sign. Anyone knows information about this woman? Can you imagine how humiliating this whole thing is, right? And 2 witnesses came and he paid them. He decided he didn't want to be involved in this marriage. So he gave these guys, $50 to tell a lie. My time to Rabbi Yehuda, what's the source for that? Amr Bevo, Atya Sima. Because the pasuk uses an interesting word. It says that the husband comes, Sam la alilot dvarim, right? He literally means he places on her these lies. But why is it? It's a very unusual word. He could have said he said these lies. What does Visam mean? So we learn from the different word Vasam. It says Ktiv in Motzi Shemra Visam la alilot dvarim. Ktiv Hatam, it says way back in Mishpatim, Lo tisimun alav nesh. Don't burden someone by giving them interest, right? By making them pay interest. So just like neshech, just like ma'ala halan mamon, means you're making them pay extra money. Afkan mamon, here it means he did it by paying somebody off. Remember, if Nachman bar Yitzchak, v'cheintani Rav Yosef Tzidoni, right? So if Nachman bar Yitzchak said, and Rav Yosef Tzidoni, Rav Yosef from Tzidon, which is not a common place that we mentioned in the Gemara, right? All the way up north in Lebanon, I guess, or wherever it is. Bei Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, he taught this in front of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Atya sima. And in fact, we learn out the word sam, which is a very unusual word, from the word sam by tisimun alav neshech by ribit. So a very strange connection between motzi shemra and interest. Now, by Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, how literally do you take this comparison? What if he was scharan b'karka? Right? Do you need kesef? You need to pay them cash? What if you pay them by giving them a house? Right? Mahu. Or what if he gave them a token amount? Pachot mishaver pruta, less than a shaver pruta. Mahu. Or if he gave both of them a pruta, so each one gets less than a shaver. Shneihem pruta mahu. So we don't answer these questions. Meaning, what's the detail? And by Rav Ashi, now Rav Ashi asked a whole other question, which again is a very interesting new approach to what this whole discussion is. Which is, what if you're motzi shemra nisuim harishonim? What if a man marries a woman? I don't know. 5 years later, they get divorced, right? And Rashi actually does. Rashi says they get divorced, and then 10 years later, he marries her again, right? And then he marries her. The next morning, he comes. And he's like, you know what? This was a terrible mistake, right? And you know why? Because when I married you 10 years ago, you weren't a virgin. You weren't a betula. You cheated on me then.
Okay.
So he doesn't claim, like the pasuk would have, that this marriage is not appropriate, because obviously they've been married before. But he says he's motzi shemra about events that happened in a previous marriage, and then it turns out that he's lying, right? He hired witnesses and etc. So what about that? Does that fit the criteria of the pasuk? Or what about anusiye achim? What about his brother's marriage? Meaning the brother marries a woman. They do kiddushin, right? The brother dies before they do nisuin, so they never sort of finish the marriage. The brother dies, and of course, we know from Yevamot, and now she falls to Yibam. So now the Yavim sleeps with her, and he, the next morning, says, wait a second, she was not a betula. She must have cheated in the engagement. So it's not his marriage, it's his brother's marriage. So what's the halacha in all of these cases? So says in where, well, we can't really resolve all of them. But pshot miyachada, we can resolve one of them. Tani Rabbi Yonah, Rabbi Yonah taught in the Braita, it says, Et biti natati li'ish hazeh, right? This is the response of the parents, right? We gave our daughter to this man. He says he didn't find betulim. Eila betulei biti, right? And they show up with the betulim. So says Rabbi Yonah, when they say et biti natati li'ish hazeh, right? Why hazeh? Obviously, you're having a discussion with this man. That tells you no, l'zeh v'lo liyavam. It's only if it's this man who was the original person who married her. But if the disagreement happens with the brother, then there's no question, there's no application of motzi shema. So that's the only one we can resolve. Now, the Gemara says, remember yesterday, we had a whole Braita, which we said was dependent on the Machloket, the Rabbanan, and Eliezer ben Yaakov. And remember I told you about it yesterday. Rabbanan said that the pasuk of Motzi Shemra is sort of a lesson, a general lesson. It's not meant to be taken very literally. And Eliezer ben Yaakov wanted everything in the pasuk to be very literal. So what is that Machloket? We didn't actually quote it yesterday. So my Rabbananu, my Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Tanya. This is the Braita that we were referring to all day, or at the end of the day yesterday. It says the Braita by the star, Ketzad Hotzat Shemra. What's the mechanism of the Torah's parsha of Hotzat Shemra? It says the Braita, Ba'al Beitin, a man shows up in Beitin after his wedding, V'amar Ploni lo matzati lebitcha betulim. He says, I did not find to the man, to the father, because that's the aggrieved party essentially. I did not, you married off your daughter to me on the assumption, on the condition that she was a betula. I did not find that she's a betula. So then, says the Braita, in Yesh Edim Shezinta Tachtav, if there are witnesses that say that she was Mizaneh when she was already married, meaning she was already engaged, then he only pays her a ketubah of mana. Because remember, a ketubah of a betula is 200. A ketubah of a woman who's previously slept with someone in almanah is 100. And so he pays 100. Now, says, what are you talking about? If she slept with someone else, she gets killed, right? She's a nara murasa. When in Yesh Edim Shezinta Tachtav, Yesh la ketubah mana, but skilahi, she gets stoned. No. You missed some of the detail. This is what the Braita is saying. If witnesses come and say that between the time that she did kiddushin and the time of the marriage, she slept with another man, then she gets skila, and that's nara murasa. It's a young girl who's engaged who sleeps with someone else. But if we can establish, again, we discussed this before, but how do you exactly establish? But let's say you can establish shezinta me'ikara, that before she got engaged to this man, she had slept with somebody else, which means she did nothing wrong, right? She never slept with someone while she was engaged, but she was false pretenses because she was presenting herself as a betula and she was really a be'ula. In that case, yesh la ketubah mana. It doesn't, we discussed this earlier, there's machloket about this, but it says this Tana, it doesn't cancel the marriage. It just means he only has to pay her a ketubah of mana because she's not a betula, right? So that's, again, how you establish that, we discussed a little bit. Nimsa sheshemra eno shemra. If it turns out that the bad thing he said about her is false, meaning he made it up, right? So the husband said she was not a betula, but he's lying. Then hu lokeh, then the husband gets lashes and notein me'asela, and he has to pay a fine of 100 selah to her father. And says the Braita, bein ba'al, bein lo ba'al. Whether he actually slept with her or didn't sleep with her, it doesn't matter, right? Either way, that's the halacha. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, which is what we quoted yesterday, lo nemru dvarim halalu ela kishaba'al. The whole parsha of Motzi Shemra only refers to where he actually slept with her. And then if he lies and says, I didn't find betulim, but turns out he's totally lying because she was a betula, then it's Motzi Shemra. But if he never slept with her, then it's not Motzi Shemra. And we discussed yesterday the machloket. Does that mean he has no lashes either? Or maybe he just doesn't pay the fine, but he does pay the lashes, right? We had a machloket about that yesterday. Now it says the Gemara, Bishlama Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he's reading the verse very literally. Hainu dichtiv, it says, right? A man marries a woman, uba eleh. He comes to her, he sleeps with her. And it also says, the akreva, when he's retelling the story, he says, I came close to her. So those both imply that he actually had physical contact with her. Now the Rabbanan, who say that he doesn't have to have slept with her for it to be Motzi Shemra, why does the Torah say, Mayu ba'alev akrava leha? Says Gemara, well, it doesn't mean physical coming. It means uva ela ba'alilut. I came to her by contriving, by making up a story. And akrev ela means bidvarim. I used words basically to tell lies about her. It doesn't mean that I physically was intimate with her. Well, okay, I mean that's a little bit of a dochek, but that's how you're reading the pasuk. But what about the continuation of the pasuk, right? Bishlam Rav Eliezer, remember the next words. We read this all yesterday. I know the man says to the court, "Lo matzati levitra betulim." I didn't find that she was a virgin. So according to Rav Eliezer and Yaakov, he slept with her, and he says, "I didn't find that she was a virgin." But according to Rabbanan, he didn't have to sleep with her. So how do you mean he didn't find she was a betula? El Rabbanan, what does it mean? Lo matzati levitra betulim. It means Lo matzati lebitcha kishrei betulim. I didn't find that she had people. Rashi understands this means witnesses who said she was a virgin. Right? I got suspicious for whatever reason. I started asking her about different men that she knew. Seemed a little bit too familiar, maybe at the wedding, and so I started asking around. And I started asking people questions maybe she should have asked before the wedding. Right? Did she know these people? Was she friends with them? What was the nature of their relationship? And I couldn't find anyone who said that she didn't sleep with someone, that she was kosher, that she slept, that she was okay. So, okay, that's what the pasuk means. It says where I will continue. Bishlam Reb Eliezer and Yaakov, the next words are, the parents come and say, Ana dichtiv, Ele betule biti. These are the virginity of our daughter. So it implies they're showing off something that proves that she was a virgin. But the Rabbanan, he didn't even have to sleep with her. So what do you mean, Ele betule biti? That's why it's the same answer. What they say is, these are the witnesses. Elu kishrei bitule biti. These are, right, you're claiming that she had this bad relationship with some man, or Rashi understands it's Adam Zuman, right? You had witnesses who came and said she slept on Monday with some other guy. I have witnesses who say that they were not there on Monday, right? So these are the people who prove the kashrut, the appropriateness of my daughter, of our daughter. So that's what the pasuk means. Says the Gemara. It gets very graphic in the pasuk. They spread out the sheet, right? Obviously implying a real thing. But Rabbanan, what sheet is there? If he never slept with her, and it's referring to the witnesses, then what's the sheet we're talking about? My parsu asimla, Rabbi Avo, parsu ma shesamla. Parsu asimla does not mean literally sheet. It means they spread out what they just told, right? That they say the arguments of what they just proved, that the witnesses were false witnesses. Keditanya, in fact, there is a writer that says that clearly. Uparsua simla does not mean that they spread out a sheet. It means melamed shebaim edim shalzeh, the edim shalzeh, that the witnesses of the father and the mother come, the witnesses of the husband come, and they discuss who's telling a lie and who's telling the truth. Uborivim et hadavar, and they clarify it, his simla chadasha, that it becomes as clear as a brand new cloth, right? So it's not that the cloth is the proof. It's that court verifies who's telling the truth, who was really there, and it becomes as clear as a simla chadasha, right? Which is, as you remember in Navi, simla chadasha is a symbol or a very clear and unambiguous a passage of the Melucha. Continues the Gemara, 4 lines in the bottom, in the middle of the line. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Dvarim kichtavam. Now, I disagree with your whole interpretive understanding of the pasuk. It's exactly what it says. Simla is mamash. It means literally a cloth. He had to have slept with her. He says she wasn't a virgin, a betula. The parents come and bring proof of that, and that's when he gets punished. Sholach Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rav Yaakov bar Giuri, Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan. Afal Gav, says Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Yaakov bar Giuri, the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Even though lo matzinu b'chol haTorah kula shechlaka katuv ben biyah kedarka biyah shelo kedarka, right? In every case in the Torah where it says a person or a thing, even an animal, should not sleep with, should not have an illicit intercourse, right, between a man and a woman, a man and a relative, etc., etc., etc. We never differentiate between vaginal intercourse, biyah kedarka, or anal intercourse, biyah shelo kedarka. If a man sleeps with a woman inappropriately, whether it's done kedarka or shelo kedarka, he's chayav makot ula onshim. He's chayav or she's chayav, right? The regular punishments of makot and onshim. The act that's prohibited is a sexual intercourse. It doesn't matter whether it's kedarka or shelo kedarka throughout the Torah. Okay. However, says this Amora, there's one exception. That is aval motzi shemra chala. Its exception is motzi shemra, because according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, if you recall, by motzi shemra, you're only chayiv if you actually sleep with her. I mean, the Chachamim don't care about sleeping with her; it doesn't matter. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, you're only chayiv if you actually sleep with her. However, that means only if you sleep with her vaginally, right? And obviously that makes a little bit of sense, because what his claim is lo matzati lebitcha betulim. I didn't find that she was a batula. Obviously, if you slept with her shalom kedarka, there's no way to prove whether she's a batula or not a batula, right? So in this one case of a motzi shemra chalak, eno chayav ad sheyival shalom kedarka. We're going to change this in a second, but you're only chayav if you sleep with her shalom kedarka. You actually sleep with her not vaginally. You sleep with her shalom kedarka, and then you're yotzi shemra kedarka, and you lie because you say I slept with her and I didn't find betulim. Says, well, that doesn't make any sense. Come on, who are you going according to? Rabbanan recall, don't even care if the man sleeps with her or not. So afal gav lo baal. You can't tell me it depended on what way he sleeps with her. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov doesn't make any sense, because it needs to be turn the page, right? It has to be he sleeps with her regularly, vaginally, because he has to be able to say, I didn't find betulim. Ella, you're right, that's what we meant to say. Shalach Rav Kahana Mishmei Rav Yochanan, he got a little confused. He was so excited about this, rule that he got a little confused about how to say it. The right way to say it is Eno Chayav Ad Sheyivol Kedarka. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, you're only chayav if you have bia kedarka. You sleep with her regularly, vaginally, and yotzi shemra bikedarka, and you say, I didn't find that she was a betula. It turns out that you're lying, right? And therefore, that's the only case we have motzi shemra. But if you slept with her not kedarka, shelo kedarka, then there wouldn't be any motzi shemra, because essentially there's no way you could have proven it, and you didn't fall into the fitting of the pasuk. Okay, so there we are. That is the parsha of motzi shemra. Okay, continues the next Mishnah, and we're going to move on, though it's obviously going to be very connected. Says the Mishnah again. The connection, I would say, is this whole connection of understanding, really what a father's both responsibility and rights maybe are for a na'ara. Again, some of this applies to Ketana, but for a na'ara who is between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. So says the Mishnah, Ha'av zakai bebito, right? A father has rights, meaning he has essentially, I would say, you could say ownership, right? So a father has rights over his daughter for bikidusheha. He gets anything that she gets for kiddushin, or he has the right to assign her a kiddushin, whether it's kesef, shtar, or bi'ah, right? Meaning if she gets money, you give it to the father and he gets to keep it. If it's a shtar, he's the one who accepts it. And if it's bi'ah, he can say to her or to a man, here's my daughter for you to sleep with, to get married to. And he's zakai b'metziata. Now Rashi understands that this is referring to a girl who's a minor or a na'ara, which is the Gemara's understanding, but we'll see why. So meaning up till the age of 12 and a half. Once she's 12 and a half, she's no longer under the father's rishut. But when she's a minor or in that first half a year of adulthood, what we call adulthood, then the father gets these rights. And he is zakai b'metziata. He gets anything she finds, right? If she finds something on the side of the street, again, up till age 12 and a half, it belongs to her father. And Maaseh Yadeh, any work she does and gets paid for, the money goes to the father. And Hafarat Nidara, if she makes a neder, he has full ownership basically over it, and he could be mefir and annul it. Umikabelt Gita. Now, if she gets married and she's not yet 12 and a half, and she gets divorced, the father gets to accept the divorce, not her. Okay, and we'll see all of these reasons in the Gemara. The Eino, now this is one limitation, he's Eino Ochel Perot Bechaya. Let's say she inherits property, right? So Rashi says her mother dies, right? So not from the father, obviously. And mother leaves her the rights to the Empire State Building, right? Let's say, very wealthy family. So then obviously they get paid a lot of, obviously the example in the Gemara is a fruit tree, right? So every year it's producing, thousands and thousands of dollars of fruit. He does not get that fruit. It goes for her into an account that's for her for whatever she wants, whenever at some other point. Maybe she'll get married, it'll go with her marriage. But he doesn't get to keep the fruits of that property that she inherited. Okay, that's, again, we'll see in the Gemara the reason for all of this, or the source for all of this. And furthermore, that's it, right? Yeah, Nasate. Now, if she gets married, then all of these rights transition to her husband, right? But one thing he gets more, Yeter alav haba, the Baal gets even more rights, she'ochel perot b'chaya, because the husband does get the perot. So if a man marries a woman, we're going to discuss this as we keep going in the Masechet, there's something called nichsei malug, right, which are the properties that she brings into the marriage. The husband does not get that property. And so she owns the Empire State Building, he does not own it, but he gets all of the money that it generates every year or every day while they're married. So although the father doesn't get that, the husband does get that. And chayav b'mizonaten, now the husband, of course, has responsibilities to provide food for her, mazon, and he's chayav b'pir kuna, he's chayav to redeem her if she gets captured. He has to pay a ransom to redeem her, and he's chayav b'kfurata. She dies, he's chayav to bury her. And Rabbi Yehuda points out that this does not mean just simply burying her. It means giving her the proper burial that she's befitting of, which is afilo anisha b'Yisrael. Even the poorest person deserves lo yivchot mishnei chalilim u'mekonanot. You need to have at least two people, playing the flutes, and you have to have hired people to wail the mekonanot, right? So when we say a funeral, it's not mean the bare bones, right? There has to be an appropriate funeral for her statue. Now says the Gemara, how do we know this? Because
Pun not intended.
Sorry?
Pun not intended.
Pun not intended. Thank you.
Bare bones.
Says the Gemara, the kesef minol. Now, how do you know that the father gets the money? A woman goes, let's say especially if she's above 12, right? If she's less than 12, I could get it. But let's say she's above molasses in the Gemara. A man comes to a woman and says, I want to give you, I want to marry you, and here's a gift of, $10,000 to marry me. How do you know that goes to the father? Why doesn't it go to her? She's the one getting married. The kesef minalan. I'm reviewed on my crop because the pasuk says in the beginning of Parshat Mishpatim that a man, remember, this is very related issues, unfortunately, but you can see from the, well, not unfortunately, but from the framing, selling a person's daughter for slavery and selling her off for marriage are very much connected in the Torah, right? So the Torah, of course, in the beginning of Mishpatim has a halacha that a person can sell his daughter as a slave, a minor, and that the master, the Adon, has to take care of her. And if he doesn't, she goes free, et cetera, et cetera. But the Torah says that if she becomes an adult, right, if she becomes a na'ara, she gets simanim, then yatzah chinam, she goes out free, ein kesef. You don't have to pay any money, right? Because usually the father got, say, $100,000 for this to give his daughter as a slave, as a whatever you call her. If she becomes an adult, then she goes out and he doesn't have to pay back that money. But the words ein kesef tell you something very unique. They tell you ein kesef la'adon zeh. No money goes in this context if she becomes an adult. But yesh kesef la'adon acher. The slave owner, the master of her, doesn't get any money. But a different owner of her gets money, and that is manu avia, right? That means it's her father. So that when she leaves her father's reshut, right? So if she leaves the slaves, the adon's reshut because she became an adult, there's no money. But if she leaves her father's reshut because she got married, then there is money, and the money goes to her father. She says, well, maybe there's money, but how do you know it goes to her father? Ema ledida. Maybe the money goes to her, right? How do you know the money goes to her father? It's well, because her father is the one who decides whether she gets married. Because hashta avia mekabel kidusha. The father is the one who gives her away in marriage. As it says by Motzi Shemra, et biti natati leish hazeh. I gave our daughter to this man. So since he has the control over her marriage, it doesn't make any sense that that she would get the money. Says Gemara, well, but maybe that's only by katana. Maybe it's only true that if a father marries off his daughter who's 10, and she has no independent ownership, so she doesn't get the money. But if she's already 12, in halacha, she's an adult, right? And itleyad, she has her own independent sort of ownership. Maybe she gets the money. Maybe iu tikdash nafsha. Maybe she's in charge of her own kiddushin, and tishkol kaspa, and she gets the money for that marriage. Says the Gemara, you would think that. But the pasuk says, Amar Kra bin uraha beit avia. And when she is a na'ara, she remains in the house of her father. And kol shvach neurim le'avia. That it's a very interesting and strange category. When she's a katana, everything goes to her father. She's no independent self, right? When she's a bogeret, she's an adult. Everything goes to her. But in this period of na'ara, she's above 12. So she's chayav mita for doing things. She's an adult, but she still remains in her father's house for those 6 months, and everything goes to her father. Says Gemara, well, that is a very nice reading of the pasuk. But what about Rav Huna? Amarav said, Elahada Amrav Yuda Amarav. Rav Huna, sorry, Amarav. Minayin shemaseh habat la'avia. How do you know that if a girl works, let's say she's an incredibly talented, mathematician, right? And she gets paid huge money to design algorithms for someone, all that money goes to her father. How do you know that? Shenemar, because the pasuk says, that a man sells his daughter as a slave, as an amma. So ma amma maseh yadeh l'rabba. Just like obviously if you sell a woman as a slave, her work goes to her owner, to her master. So af bat maseh yadeh l'avia, right? So too, a daughter, her father is essentially the equivalent of the master. The father has a right to sell her, so he has a right to own everything that she produces. Now, ask the Gemara, if you just quoted a pasuk to me that said "Binurah beit avia" means when you're a nara, you stay in your father's house. Why do you need this other pasuk to tell me that you can sell off your daughter so you can get everything she makes? She's in your house, so of course you get everything she makes, right? Ask the Gemara, Lamali. So what do you need this pasuk for? Typically, mi binurah beit avia. It must be that binurah beit avia does not tell you that. That binurah beit avia only tells you that a daughter who's a nara is in her father's house for certain purposes. But remember, that pasuk was written about making nidarim, and a woman who makes a neder, her father can annul it. But that only doesn't tell you that she's in her father's house, that every money, every financial thing she has goes to her father. Why not? Why can't we derive it from there? But just like the father has oversight and control over her nidarim, the father should have control over her money. Well, we never learn money from Isra. We don't learn out money from Isra. The Torah says that by Isur, by Neder, he controls it, but it doesn't say anything about her money. Okay, but what about Knas? Right? The Torah very clearly says that a Na'ara who's either raped or is Motzi Shemra, the Knas goes to her father, right? So maybe if the Knas goes to her father, it means the father has control, and so all her money should go to her father, right? Why don't you prove it from Knas? It's more the same answer. Mimona miknasa lo yafina. We don't learn out money from Knas. The Torah says a special halacha by Knas. It doesn't mean it's true about her money. What about boshet upigam? Remember, we said that a woman is raped. There's boshet and pigam, and it goes to the father. So that's essentially money. It's not a Knas. That goes to her father. Well, that's very special because shani boshet upigam the avia nami shayachte. Right? It also affects, there's different interpretations of why, it also affects her father, right? Because the embarrassment that's brought on her and it's brought on the whole family. So there's boshet for her father and pigam for her father. She's pigam is because now when she gets remarried, she can't get 200 for a ketubah. But anyways, there's embarrassment for the family, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, again, if she has a job and she makes $1 million, that should go to her father. Ella, says the Gemara, mistavra. The logical thing is right? That when the Torah is saying, remember the verse that started this all off, if you remember, top of the Gemara today, of this current Gemara, was the Chinam ein custom. She goes out to freedom, there is no money, right? Says Rashi explains this, Rashi brings a few different shatim, but he likes this one from the Shotot. He says that when it says there, she goes out for free, there's no money, right? If you remember, there's different ways that a woman who's a slave can go out to freedom. One way is by becoming an adult. Another way is by getting married. But another way is by paying back the debt, right? Let's say she was, she was sold for 6 years before she was an adult. And the man paid $600,000, so it's $100,000 a year. The family can gather up the money and repay the loan, right? Basically, not the loan, repay the debt, repay the cost. And so in that case, right, that's the kavate, which is saying that even though in that case, it would be similar. And there'd be a way basically for them to give money to get out of it, right? Still, just like that money would go to the Adon. If you were going to give money, it would go to the one who owns her. So too, if you give money to get her out from the father's house, that money goes to the father. So just like giving money to get her out of slavery will go to her owner, giving money to get her out of her familial house goes to her father or goes to her family. So that's the kavate. That's the equivalent to the case of Amma. Says well, but it's not so similar. Because halodamia, it's not really similar when you get out of slavery to when you leave and get married. Because lodamia hayitzia la hayitzia. This leaving is not similar to the other leaving. Because hatam gabi adon there, when you leave being a slave, nafkale mereshute the gamre, you become free completely. But yitzia da'av, when the person leaves the father's house and gets kiddushin, they're not totally free. Akati mechasra masira l'chuppah, right? They still, she's not chuppah yet. So remember there's this middle stage, right? A woman stays in her father's house after she gets kiddushin until she goes to the chuppah. So it's not the same thing as leaving from an owner's house, from an adon. Says why you're right. But for some purposes, she certainly does leave her father's reshut the second she accepts kiddushin, or he accepts kiddushin for her, and that's for the purposes of hafarat nidarim. It's not, as we learned in the Mishnah, nara murasa, a girl who's a nara but is now engaged. Her father can no longer unilaterally be mefir her nidarim. Avia u ba'ala mefirin nidara. It takes the mefir and la nidara. Takes her and her father, her father and her husband, they mefir her nidarim. So for some purposes, she is leaving her father's rishon. And so that is the source for money. And then what about shtar ubiyah? How do you know that the father has the ability to accept a shtar of marriage for her, or to allow her, make her to have biyah with someone for marriage? Nalan, amarkra, because it says haita leisha acher, and the word haita is a little bit extra to tell you itkish havayot lahadadi, that all of the ways of getting married are similar. And just like for money, he controls that, he controls all the ways that she gets married. And so that is the power the father has. Again, this all is limited to that 6 months. Well, to when she's a minor, and that first 6 months when she's a nara. Hanan, you're muted, but we see your lips moving.
No, I mean, I got that. If she is a Bulgarian and she's earning money, she keeps it?
She does, yes.
In her father's house, she keeps it.
Correct. She does. It's a little complicated because then the question is, he doesn't have to provide for her anymore, right?
He can still do hafarat nidarim too.
No. She does her own when she's a Bulgarian.
When she's a Bulgarian.
Correct.
Living in her father's house.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
But the Gemara doesn't really talk about it a lot because they assume that it never happened. Like,
I know,
it's
that's
so strange.
That's the weird thing,
Right.
is that these cases of katana and na'ara, it makes it sound like that's the norm.
Right. No, it does. Now, whether it really was, I don't know in what period of time it was real, but the Gemara makes this assumption that there's almost nothing, it almost doesn't exist that there's a 13-year-old living in her father's house who's not married.
Right.
It
Which
can't be that. It can't be the truth, right? In any society, nothing's.
right.
But who knows? I don't. That's the sort of the assumption of the pasuk.
Yeah, that's what it's strange, that
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Have a good week, everyone. Shavua tov.
Thank you, Shavua Tov.
Thank you.
Shavua tov.